It happened in a small town in Arkansas, deep in the middle of summer, when the humidity could suffocate you as easily as fear. Frank Miller. A 67-year-old retired truck driver had suffered from asthma for most of his life. That night, he collapsed in his living room after a violent attack. His daughter, Claire, couldn't find a pulse. His chest didn't move. His lips were pale. In her panic, she called not 911 but the local funeral home, thinking her father was gone. The mortician, Mr. Holloway, came within the hour. By 11 p.m., Frank's body was zipped into a black bag, tagged, and placed inside one of the cold drawers at Holloway & Son's funeral. Service's temperature, 38 degrees Fahrenheit, 3 degrees Celsius. For nearly 21 hours, Frank lay in silence among the dead. His skin stiffened. His breath, though faint, formed frost against the cold metal tray beneath him. Then, around 8 p.m. the next day, muffled sounds began echoing through the refrigerated room. At first, the staff thought it was the compressor kicking in, until they heard a faint knock. Then another. Then a scream. The kind of scream that doesn't come from a ghost raw. Wet, desperate, one of the assistants, trembling, opened the drawer halfway. Frank's eyes stared back, wide open and bloodshot, his fingers trembling and blue. The man was alive, barely, but something wasn't right. When they pulled him out, Frank didn't speak much. He just kept whispering one thing, over and over. It wasn't empty in there? He survived the night, but refused to talk about what he'd seen or heard while locked in the morgue. The doctors called it hypothermic hallucination. The locals called it a resurrection, and the staff at Holloway's. They still swear that, ever since that night, one of the drawers knocks back when the room goes dark. It happened in a quiet rural town in Mississippi, where folks still held on to old traditions and everybody knew each other's name. Harold Jenkins, 62, had suffered from a bad heart for years. One afternoon, while fixing his fence, he clutched his chest and collapsed right there in the dirt. By the time his neighbors found him, he was cold and still. The town doctor, an old man who'd known Harold since high school, checked for a pulse and found none. Harold was pronounced dead right on the spot. By sundown, the Jenkins family had gathered at the small white church at the edge of town. They cleaned Harold's body, dressed him in his Sunday best, and wrapped him in a burial sheet, just like Ke. Harold had once said he wanted simple, no coffin, just me and the earth. The grave had already been dug behind the church, under the oak trees. The preacher said a few quiet words. The mourners lowered the body down. That's when it happened. A noise, a muffled, choked gasp. Then the sheet started moving. A scream ripped through the crowd as Harold sat up, dirt clinging to his face, eyes wide with panic. "You trying to bury me alive?" he yelled, his voice hoarse and raw. People ran. Others fainted. The preacher dropped his Bible and backed away, whispering a prayer under his breath. Harold stumbled out of the grave, trembling and pale, his lips blue from the cold. "I heard you," he said later, voice quivering. "I heard the prayers. The shovel. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was awake the whole time." The next day, no one came near the churchyard. The grave where he'd been buried was still open, but the dirt looked disturbed, as if someone or something had crawled out during the night. Because when the sheriff came to check on Harold the next morning, the old man was gone, and they say that sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows through the pines, You can still hear him shouting, "Don't bury me yet." It happened in a town outside St. Louis, Missouri, the kind of place where tragedy spreads faster than gossip. Eli Turner, just 2 years old, had been battling a bad case of pneumonia for days. His tiny lungs struggled, his skin turned pale, and every breath sounded like it could be his last. His parents, Martha and Daniel, rushed him to the local hospital. For a moment, it seemed like the medicine was working. Eli's chest stopped moving. The heart monitor, FLATLINED, at 3:12 p.m. The doctor quietly pronounced him dead. Martha's scream echoed down the sterile hallway. The hospital staff sipped the boy's body into an airtight black bag and moved him to the storage room, awaiting transfer to the funeral home. He stayed there for almost 3 hours, surrounded by silence and refrigeration hum. That night, the family held a small wake at home, an open casket in their living room, candles flickering around the tiny white coffin. The house smelled of lilies and grief. An hour before the burial, something happened that no one could explain. The room went still. Then Eli sat up. The candles flickered violently. Gasps filled the air. His eyes clouded and glassy locked onto his father. "Daddy, can I have some water?" For a single, frozen moment, time stopped. Then screams erupted, people stumbling back, crying, crossing themselves. Daniel reached for his son, trembling, whispering his name. But before he could touch him, Eli fell back into the coffin. His body went still once more. This time, he didn't move again. When the coroner reopened the case, there was no explanation, no electrical activity, no heartbeat, no sign of revival. Just a brief, impossible moment between life and death. Neighbors say that every year, on the anniversary of Eli's funeral, the Turners' living room lights flicker right around 3:12 p.m. and sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear a small voice whisper from the dark, "Daddy, I'm thirsty." In a quiet countryside town in the American Midwest, Evelyn Brooks, a 95-year-old widow, lived alone in a creaking old farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. Everyone in town knew her kind, old-fashioned, always baking pies for the neighbors. One cold winter evening, Evelyn slipped and hit her head on the kitchen floor. When her neighbor, Martha, came to check on her the next morning, she found the old woman lying still, her skin cold, her eyes open but empty. The town doctor came, took one look, and softly said, "She's gone." Following local custom, her family held a 3-day wake inside the farmhouse. Evelyn's body was cleaned, dressed, and laid inside a wooden coffin in the parlor. Friends came to say goodbye. Candles burned through the night, and the smell of flowers filled the house. But on the third morning, something was wrong. The coffin was empty. The blanket she had been wrapped in lay crumpled on the floor. Her family thought someone had stolen her body. They searched the house, shouting her name. Then they heard a faint sound from the kitchen. When they pushed the door open, Evelyn was standing at the stove, humming softly, her back to them. The frying pan sizzled. "Grandma," Martha whispered. Evelyn turned around slowly, her face pale and hollow, eyes sunken but alive. "I slept for so long," she said in a voice dry as dust. "I woke up starving." At first, everyone was too shocked to speak until someone noticed the frying pan. Inside wasn't bacon. It wasn't meat anyone could recognize. When the sheriff arrived later that morning, they found the remains of what appeared to be fingers and a portion of a hand on the kitchen counter. The coroner confirmed one awful truth: those remains belonged to Martha, the neighbor who had found Evelyn's body days before. As for Evelyn, she was never found. The farmhouse was abandoned, boarded up, and later burned down after a string of strange disappearances nearby. It happened sometime around the year 2000. In a small rural town somewhere in the Midwest, one of those forgotten places where the streetlights flicker and the mail still gets delivered by hand. Michael Turner lived alone in his late parents' house at the edge of town. His brother, David, had died 13 years earlier in what the coroner called a violent psychotic break. No one ever talked about it again. David had been buried in the local cemetery, deep under a weathered oak tree. One foggy morning, as Michael walked out to check his old, rusted mailbox, he noticed something strange: envelope sitting neatly inside. No stamp, no return address, and the handwriting familiar. It was David's handwriting. Michael's heart dropped. His brother had been dead for over a decade. He tore the envelope open, his fingers shaking. The letter read, "Brother, I haven't been well. The hunger is getting worse. I'll come home soon. Don't be afraid." The letter smelled faintly of earth, wet and sour. Michael called the police, but when they arrived, the letter had vanished. The officer laughed it off as a prank, but Michael knew that handwriting. He'd seen it 1,000 times before. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Around 2 a.m., he heard something scraping against the side of the house, low, dragging sounds, like fingernails on wood. He grabbed his flashlight and looked out the window. Nothing. Just fog. By dawn, Michael couldn't take it anymore. He drove straight to the cemetery, shovel in hand. He found David's grave beneath the oak tree, the name carved deep into the stone. The ground looked disturbed. He began to dig. Hours later, his shovel struck the coffin lid. He pried it open and felt his stomach twist. The coffin was empty. Only long, deep claw marks etched into the inside of the wood. Then he smelled at something. Rotten, something alive. Behind him a voice whispered, hoarse and wet, "You took too long, Michael. I'm starving." They found Michael's body 3 days later, or what was left of it. The walls of his house were smeared with fingerprints and deep bite marks. The mailbox still sat at the end of the dirt road, door hanging open, and inside it, another letter. "Thanks for the meal.